Okay, now so we'll be discussing yung chapter 4 ng ating intermediate accounting 2 na subject which deals on provisions and contingent liability. Okay? So ano ba pag sinabi nating provision? Provision is an existing liability of an uncertain timing or uncertain amount. Okay? So dalawa lang siya. Hindi pwedeng both. Okay? Either uncertain yung ating timing. Okay? Just like yung na-discuss natin on the previous chapter, yung warranty. No? Minsan kasi hindi natin alam kung kailan darating or magpapa-repair yung ating mga tao. Or just like yung mga previous na just like sa premiums, di ba? Sa premium liability na example natin on chapter 2, hindi natin alam kung kailan magre-redeem yung ating mga customers. So, uncertain timing yon. And, minsan, pati yung amount din. Okay? Minsan, hindi rin natin sure kung magkano exactly, no? Kung magkano yung isa-settle natin. The essence of provision is that there is uncertainty about the timing or amount of the future expenditure. Okay? This distinguishes provision from other liabilities. So the liability definitely exists at the end of the reporting period. Alam natin. However, okay, the amount is indefinite or the date on which the obligation is due is also indefinite. And in some cases, the payee cannot be identified or determined. So actually, provision may be equivalent to, yan, minsan, this provision is sometimes referred to or minsan, ginagamit natin interchangeably with an estimated liability or loss contingency that's accrued because it's both probable and measurable. Okay? So, recognition of provision. Sabi ng PAS 13. Ito. Sabi ng PAS 13, paragraph 14, provides that provision shall be recognized as liability in the financial statement under the following conditions. So, ano ba yung mga conditions na kailangan natin? Letter A, the present obligation or the entity has present obligation, which is, yun naman yung isa sa pinaka-basic characteristic ng liability natin as we discussed doon sa chapter 1. Okay? Legal or constructive and as a result of past event. Okay? Na-discuss din natin yung concept about the obligating event. Okay? It is probable that an outflow of economic resource or resources embodied economic benefits would be required to settle the obligation. Probable. Okay? So, most likely na may outflow of economic resource na discuss din natin doon sa chapter 1, no? Either payment of cash or non-cash asset or providing service. And the amount of the obligation can be measured reliably. And take note, as we discussed dun sa previous na discussions natin, an estimate, no, could be considered to be a reliable measure. So yan, present obligation, basically na-discuss na natin to. Okay, legal or constructive, nandun din yun sa chapter 1. Okay? Yan. So, medyo parang review lang yan. Constructive obligation is an obligation that's derived from an entity's action where, ito lang na medyo may further discussion sa constructive obligation. The entity has indicated to the other party that it will accept certain responsibilities by reason of an established pattern of past practice, published policy, or sufficiently specific current statement. Okay? So, ibig sabihin that tayo, no, yung entity natin indicated to the other party na we will accept certain responsibility. Okay? Kumbaga, we have expressed a message. Okay? Whether directly or indirectly. Yung directly, of course, pag sinabi natin in current statement, or pwede naman na not necessarily that you have stated by, but because of past practice or published policy. Okay? So, yan. We have sent a message and at the same time, ito no, as a result, the entity has created valid expectation on the part of other parties. Okay? So, yan. That we will discharge those responsibilities. You have given a message and then it created a valid expectation. Okay? Yun yung sinasabi dito sa constructive obligation. So constructive obligation exists when an entity from an established pattern of practice or stated policy nag-create ng expectation that it will accept certain responsibilities. Okay? So yan yung sa constructive obligation. Again, ang yung sinasabi natin dito, constructive obligation is parang voluntarism on the part of the company. Unlike kasi sa legal obligation, this is by legislation or operation of law. Okay? Legally enforceable ang legal obligation. Ito, constructive obligation is not legally enforceable. But, yun na nga lang, it's more of like on the entity's initiative na lang. Kaya tayo nagkaroon ng obligation. And then, let's go with past events. Past events, na-discuss na rin natin ito. Okay? May obligating event, ibig sabihin, nagkaroon na ng transaction that give rise to the obligation. Okay? Ayan, hindi pwede or cannot be created yung provision natin as a result of future event. Hindi nga dapat pwedeng future, hindi pwedeng in the future pa mangyayari yung event. Dapat nangyari na yung obligating event. Okay? The event must have already occurred, which gives rise to the legal or constructive obligation. Okay, and sinasabi natin. The obligating event is an event that creates legal or constructive obligation because the entity has no realistic alternative. So, wala tayong ibang choice, parang gano'n, but to settle the liability. So, this is the case where the settlement of the obligation can be enforced by law, okay, legally enforceable, or that the event creates a valid expectation on the part of the other party. So, ito nga yung sinasabi natin na kanina na constructive obligation. Okay? Nasabi natin, probably may outflow of resources embodying economic benefits. Okay? So, provision to qualify for recognition, dapat, ito, no? Aside sa may present obligation tayo, dapat may outflow of economic resources and dapat probable siya. Okay? Ano ba yung sinasabi nating probable? Ito kasi meron ditong states of likeliness. Parang ganun. Pag sinabi kasi nating probable, it means more than 50% na mangyayari. More likely nga. Okay? Mas malaki yung chance na mangyayari kaysa sa hindi. Probable yung tawag natin doon. Pag sinabi nating 50%, pag sinabi natin possible, 50% or less likely to occur. So, pwedeng sabihin natin 50-50. So, hindi natin talaga masabi or maybe less. Okay? Less than 50% or less likely to occur. Pero pag sinabi natin remote, 10% or less, yung parang almost 0 to 10, parang halos hindi na talaga. Very slight occurrence. Parang hindi na mangyayari talaga. Okay? So again, when we say probable, more than 50% or substantially more, ibig sabihin, mas malaki yung chance talaga na mangyayari. Yan yung sinasabi natin probable. So, an outflow of economic resource is regarded as probable if the event is more likely, okay, than not to occur. So, ibig sabihin, most likely, meron tayo ditong outflow of resources embodying economic benefit. Ibig sabihin, more likely na magbabayad ka ng cash or siguro magta-transfer ka ng non-cash asset or you will provide future service. Mas malaki yung chance na mangyayari yun. Okay, yan yung sinasabi natin na probable na may outflow of resources embodying economic benefits. And then yung isa pa, sabi natin, yung measurement, diba? It could be measured reliably. Sabi natin dito sa characteristic, the amount of the obligation can be measured reliably. Paano to, sir? Because the amount is uncertain. Okay? But na-mention natin yung reliable estimate. Sabi ng paragraph 25, ng PS37, the use of estimates is essential part of the preparation of financial statement and does not undermine their reliability. Okay? So basically nga guys, no, sa accounting natin, there is substantial amount or substantial use of estimates. Okay? So marami talaga mga bagay sa accounting na ginagamitan natin ng estimates. Maraming application. But, yun na nga sinasabi dito, even though these are just estimates, but it doesn't mean that they are not reliable measure. Okay? Yan, sinabi nga dyan that it does not undermine their reliability. Especially true in the case of provision because in nature, provision is more uncertain than most items in the statement of financial position. Okay? Sabi daw ng standard, using range of possible outcomes when an entity usually would be able to make an estimate of the obligation that is sufficiently reliable. Okay? So, meron tayong range of possible outcomes. Meron tayo dyan sa financial management. No? Discussing about probabilities. No? Meron yan kung paano tayo mag-compute, no, ng expected outcome natin, expected value. When no reliable estimate can be made, no liability is recognized. Kasi nga, paano mo lalagyan ng value or amount kung hindi mo nga siya ma-estimate reliably? Okay? So, walang liability pag ganon. Okay? So, paano yun, sir? Later, meron tayong i-discuss. What if hindi natin sure yung amount niya? Okay? Para later na yun. So now, let's proceed muna dito sa measurement of provision. The amount recognized as provision should be the best estimate. Okay? Meron tayo dito ang pinag-uusapan about best estimate. The best estimate is the amount that the entity would rationally pay to settle the obligation at the end of the reporting period or to transfer it to the third party at that time. Ito yung normally siguro we could expect to settle the obligation. Yun yung sinasabi niya. Where single obligation is being measured, the individual most likely outcome adjusted for the effect of other possible outcomes may be the best estimate. So, depende yan guys, no, kung paano natin i-determine yung best estimate. So, kung single obligation, so individual most likely outcome. So, may mga ano kasi dyan eh. May mga level of like magkano kaya yung gagastusin natin o babayaran natin. We have to take that into consideration. Okay? Pag range of possibility or range of possible outcomes lang naman, kasi for example dito, pag range of possible outcomes kasi guys, ito yung meron tayong sabihin natin na from and to. Okay? So, for example, may babayaran ka. Kunyari, penalty. May penalty ako. So, hindi mo alam yung magkano talaga siya. So, sabihin natin, you would estimate that siguro somewhere between 100 to 200. Yan. Range of possible outcomes yung tawag dyan. Okay? So, hindi mo alam. Basta somewhere doon. Okay? Pag single naman yung measurement natin, for example, pwede mong sabihin na pwedeng maging 50 or pwedeng maging 30 or pwedeng maging 70. So, ibig sabihin may mga specific choices ka. Hindi yun yung range. Okay? Ngayon, pag range of possible outcomes daw, and each point is that range is likely as any other, the midpoint of the range is used. Let's say, kunyari, sabi natin kanina, 100 to 150. 100 to 200. So, let's say, hindi natin masabi talaga kung saan doon yung likely. Both of them were likely naman to happen. So, pwedeng midpoint na lang yung gamitin natin. Just like 150 yata is something. Ganon. Midpoint of 100 and 200. Okay? So, pwedeng ganon daw. Ngayon, pag mayroong large population of items, let's say maraming possible. Okay? Wini-weight natin sila. All possible outcomes bar the associated possibilities or expected value. Ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo guys, no? Meron may technique tayo on computing this expected value using the probabilities. Okay, so meron siyang illustration dito. Parang ganito na, para mas madali nating ma-imagine. The entity sells goods with a warranty under with a customer, which customer are covered for the cost of repairs and any manufacturing defects that become apparent within 6 months after the purchase. Okay? So, pag minor defect daw, okay, pag minor defect, it would cost about 1 million. Pag major, syempre major to, mas mahal to. Sabi pag major defect daw, it would cost around 5 million. Okay? Ngayon, sabi, the entity's past experience and future expectation, 75% of the goods naman has no defect. Okay? So, walang defect naman to. 20% will have minor defects and 5% will have major defects. So, syempre, kung wala kang defect, zero, wala tayong gagastusin. Okay? So, ang gagawin natin dun sa 0, 1 million, and 5 million, i-average lang natin siya. Okay? So, i-weighted average natin siya. So, dito, for instance, yung 75%, wala, zero siya eh. Kasi nga, walang defect. Pero doon sa 1 million, sabi natin, 25% of the units will have defect, minor defect. So, 1 million times 20%, yung value niya is 200,000. Whereas, yung 5 million, okay, itong 5 million na to, 5% daw ng mga products natin possibly magkakaroon ng major defects. So, 5% times 5 million, that's 250,000. That is yung total expected value ng repairs natin. Okay? Cost of repairs. Again, this is just the average. Okay? Average lang nung itong mga possibility. Possibility na walang defect, minor defect, and major defect. Okay? Ito pa, another illustration. An entity is a defendant in a patent infringement suit. The lawyers believe that there is 60% chance that the court will not dismiss the case. Ibig sabihin, tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung kaso. Okay? And the entity will incur an outflow of future economic benefits. So, may liability tayo dito. Now, if the court rules, sabi daw that the entity, if the court rules against the entity and in favor of the claimant, sabi ng lawyers natin, 30% chance that the entity will pay damages of 4 million and 70% chance that the damages will be 2 million. So, ito yung dalawang possible na mangyayari. Bayad tayo ng 4 million or bayad tayo ng 2 million. Okay? So, ito yung probability distribution niya. 30% chance na ito yung mangyayari, 70% chance na ito yung mangyayari. Okay? So basically, pag kinumpute natin dito, i-weighted average lang natin based dito sa kanyang probability distribution. 30, 70. Ita-times mo lang yan. Okay? Ita-times mo lang siya. Yun nga lang, dinirect niya na yung 60%, no? Paano ba? Mas maganda sana kasi later na lang yung 60% eh. Anyway, sige. Inano niya na yung 60%, it's because of this. Kasi kasama din to sa probability distribution natin eh. Kumbaga may 60% chance na i-dismiss. 40% chance na i-dismiss, 60% chance na hindi i-dismiss. Siyempre, pag dinismiss, wala tayong babayaran. Zero. Okay? Pero pag hindi dinismiss, at 60%, probably may babayaran tayo. So, kinumpute nyo na yung 60%. Or another way is to compute this 30% times 4 million, that's 1.2, no? 1.2 million. Tapos itong 70 times 2 million, this is 1.4. Ang total nun, wait na, ipalabasin natin yung calculator. Ang total nun would be 1, 2 plus 1, 4. 2.6. Okay? Tapos ito, isa-subject na naman natin to sa panibagong computation ng probabilities. Kasi meron tayong 40-60 eh. 40% wala tayong babayaran. Edi 0 yon. So, 0 na agad yun. Tapos 60% nito, times 0.60, 1,560. Yun yung 1,560 na meron siya dito. Ayan, 0 plus 1,560. Medyo dinirect niya lang kasi yung multiplication. Anyway, 1,560 tapos meron pang 10% risk adjustment factor sa probability. Okay, so medyo ano lang siya, dinagdagan niya ng 10%. Ito kasi yung parang sa risk adjustment, it's more like a standard deviation application kasi ibig sabihin, the amount may fall within a 10% range. Pwedeng plus 10 or minus 10%. But since meron tayong concept of conservatism sa accounting, so mas okay nang we estimate at the worst. So doon na lang tayo sa plus 10 instead of considering the minus 10%. So plus 10%. So yung estimated niya na amount na provision is 1,716,000. Okay? Yun na nga lang, kasi dito uncertain pa eh. Hindi alam kung kailan matatapos yung kaso. Pero in case na matagal yung kaso natin, let's say aabot siya ng years 2 or beyond. So yan, sabi niya, this amount should be discounted. Okay? I-discount natin siya para may ano natin yung effect ng time value of money. Kasi baka hindi natin alam yung kaso na to would take 3 years pa eh. So, kailangan natin i-discount siya into its present value. Okay? Kasi sabi natin guys, conceptually, liability should be measured at present value. Okay? Yan. So, yan. Example niya ng paggamit ng probability. Pero dun sa ano guys, meron kasi akong topic about probability dun sa, I think, dun sa aking YouTube channel, meron akong discussion dun ng financial risk management. Financial management 16. Okay, sa module 1 ko, meron akong discussion dun about probabilities. If you could take a look at that para mas makita niyo application nitong estimates and probabilities. Okay? So, other measurement consideration. Ano pa ba yung pwede nating gamitin? Okay? Or yung mga taken into consideration in measuring a provision. So, ano? So, risk and uncertainties, present value, future events, expected disposal of assets, reimbursement, changes in provision, use of provision, future operating losses, and onerous contracts. Ito mga items na to, yung iba dito, isa-isahin natin. Okay, on the dito sa ating mga succeeding discussions. Okay? So, risk and uncertainties. The risks and uncertainties that inevitably surround the event and circumstances shall be taken into account in reaching the best estimate provision. Risk describes variability of outcome. When it comes to risk kasi, in financial management purposes, the possibility na yung expected mo would be different, okay, from the actual outcome. Yan yung ibig sabihin ng risk. Kaya nga dito, variability of the outcome. The possibility kasi na iba yung ina-expect mo versus dun sa magiging outcome talaga. Okay, yan yung risk natin. So, risk adjustment may increase the amount at which the liability is measured. O yung parang meron tayong standard deviation in statistics. Okay, as prudent states, ito yung na-mention ko yata kanina yung plus minus. No? Making judgment under conditions of uncertainty so that income and assets are not overstated. Expense and liabilities are not understated. Ito yung sabi ko kanina, prudence or conservatism. No? They are the same. Kaya nga, kung dun sa plus minus side, mas okay pa na dun na lang tayo sa plus side. No? So, mas okay pa na maging expense and liability siya. So, yan yung sinasabi niya dito. However, uncertainty does not justify the creation of excessive provisions or deliberate overstatement of liabilities. Hindi naman ibig sabihin na i-exaggerate mo na yung standard deviation na sabihin mo na, okay, sige, i-overstate natin yung expense and liabilities. No, dapat kung mag-exercise ka rin ng conservatism, prudence, dapat reasonable din naman. Okay? Reasonable din. So, yan yung sa risk and uncertainties. Next, present value of obligation. Ito na yung nasabi natin kanina. No? If the effect of the time value of money is material, kailangan present value yung gagamitin mo. I-discount natin siya. Okay? Pero kung yung settlement naman natin is short term lang, hindi naman natin kailangan i-discount. Yun nga lang guys, baka may mga ganong case sa provision that it will take time. Just like later, no? Pag nag-discuss tayo dito ng mga, just like, saan nandito yung ano. Meron dito tayo later na disposal of assets or decommissioning liability. Yan. Meron tayong di-discuss later about decommissioning liability which would take time. So, pag medyo matagal siya, the effect of discounting would be material. So, kailangan natin gamitan ng present value yun. Okay? The discount rate should be the pre-tax rate that reflects the current market assessment of the time value of money and the risk specific to the liability. Okay? Pre-tax na rate siya. It should not reflect the risk for which cash flow estimates have already been adjusted. Okay? Anyway, the point dito is that if material yung effect ng discounting, i-discount mo. Present value yung gagamitin natin. If immaterial naman yung discounting, kahit na hindi mo na i-discount. Okay? Ano pa? Future events. Future events that affect the amount required to settle the obligation should be reflected in the amount of provision where there is sufficient evidence that they will occur. So, pag may future event, okay, and if it is likely to occur, more likely to occur, then, kailangan natin i-consider yung mga future events na yun. Especially kung meron siyang meron siyang effect dun sa amount to be settled in the liability. Yan. Yung mga future events na yan include new legislation and changes in technology. Okay, next, effect or expected disposal of assets. Gains from expected disposal of assets shall not be taken into account in measuring a provision. Instead, an entity shall recognize gain on disposal at the time of the disposition of the asset. Okay? Later, pag meron siyang related na asset, no? Just like dun sa kasi later, no? Medyo specific to mga to. Bakit may mga related siya dun sa expected disposal of asset? Just like sa decommissioning liability, mababalikan natin tong sinasabi natin yan. If there are expected gains from the disposal of the asset, hindi natin siya kasama or isasama dun sa measurement of the provision. Yun yung sinasabi niya. Okay? Kung meron man tayong in-expect na gain, hayaan lang natin yan doon. Tapos later na lang, pag i-dispose na talaga natin yung asset, i-recognize natin yung gain, kung may gain talaga. Okay? So yan. Cash flow from disposal are treated separately from the measurement of the provision. Walang kinalaman yung disposal ng asset dun sa liabilities natin. Yung sinasabi niya dito. Okay? Separate siya. Na paano pag may mga mari-reimburse? Okay? Where sum of all of the expenditure required to settle the provision, kung may gagastusin na tayo, baka maka-encounter tayo na may reimbursement by another party. No? For some reason, kung sakali lang naman na meron tayong matatanggap na reimbursement dun sa gagastusin natin, okay? So, dapat i-consider natin siya. Okay? When it is virtually certain na yung reimbursement na yan would be received if the entity settles the obligation. Okay? So, pag meron tayong in-expect na reimbursement, kailangan natin i-consider yan if virtually certain. Okay? So, parang medyo we can say, hindi naman natin talaga masasabi like for certain. Pero in a way, we could say that malaki yung chance. Okay? Virtually certain na meron tayong marireceive, kailangan natin i-consider yan in measuring the provision. The reimbursement shall be treated as separate asset and not netted against the estimated liability for the provision. So, pag gumawa ka ng provision dito, hindi mo siya ibabawas dun sa estimated liability. But rather, i-asset mo siya. Okay? Pero later, of course, when it comes to the payment, mababawas naman yan dun sa babayaran mo. Okay? But for the purpose of estimating the provision, separate din siya, hindi siya binabawas. The amount of the reimbursement shall not exceed the amount of the provision. Reimbursement nga lang hindi naman pwedeng may reimbursement na may sumobra ka pa. Hindi ka naman politiko eh. Sa ano lang yan, pwede lang yan sa politics. Pero syempre dito sa accounting natin, hindi pwede mas malaki pa yung reimbursement kaysa dun sa ika-cash out mo. Okay? Ayan. However, sa income statement naman, ito kasi kanina assets and liability na presentation to eh. Yung expense relating to the provision, pwedeng man-net na natin siya. Okay? Kasi normally, just like yung makita nyo previously, di ba? Kung magkano yung expense, yun din yung liability na nire-recognize natin. Okay? Pero pag may reimbursement tayo, yung expense na yun, pwedeng bumawas na siya. Okay? Yung reimbursement na pwede nang bumawas dito sa expense na yan. But again, sa asset and liability presentation, separate sila. Yung receivable and yung payable. Pero dito, sa expense, yan, pwede mo siyang inet. Okay, paano pag may changes? Yung provisions natin, it will be reviewed at the end of every reporting period. At syempre, kailangan natin mag-adjust. Okay, kung merong mga changes. Just like change in the best estimates. Baka kasi magkaroon na ng, as time goes by, magkaroon na ng better na, mas maging clear na siya. So, mas madali na natin ma-estimate or mas madali na tayong maka-establish ng pwede mangyari in the future. Okay? Pag ganon, then syempre kailangan din natin mag-adjust. Yan. Baka kailangan din natin mag-reverse. In case lang naman, if it's no longer probable that an outflow of economic benefit would be required to settle the obligation. Just like kunyari, yung kaso-kaso natin. Kasi di ba kanina nag-start tayo, may kaso tayo this year. Kaso lang hindi pa natin talaga malalaman kung ano yung magiging effect. Pero syempre, nung nagkaroon tayo ng kaso, nag-provide tayo, no? Gumawa tayo ng provision. Meron tayo expense and liability at that part. Now let's say, by the end of the year, nakita natin yung progress ng kaso natin, and then nakita natin na maliit na lang pala yung chance na matalo tayo. Ibig sabihin, mas malaking chance na mananalo tayo, therefore we don't have to pay any sa mga damages na kiniklaim. Then, pag ganun yung progression, so kailangan natin i-consider yun. Baka kailangan na natin i-reverse or baka kailangan natin at least bawasan yung amount ng obligation. Okay? Yan. When discounting is used, the carrying amount of the provision increases each period to reflect the passage of time. Yung ano lang to, amortization lang to guys ng liability. Eventually kasi ganun yung magiging effect sa discounting eh. Ngayon, babawasan natin but every year na nag-amortize ka, dinadagdag, binabalik mo nang binabalik siya. Okay? So, yun lang naman yung sinasabi niyan. Pag nag-discuss tayo ng amortization, later mas marirealize niyan. Okay? Especially pag nag-discuss tayo ng non-interest bearing loan. Okay, the use of provision, okay, shall be only used for expenditures which the provision was originally recognized lang. Okay, for example, meron tayong plant dismantlement. Okay? Meron tayong provision for plant dismantlement. Kasi later meron tayong especially sa mga wasting asset na natin. Kanya drilling, di ba? Nag-drill tayo ng oil. May mga plants kasi or may mga equipments tayo dun na talagang nilalagay natin dun sa whether it's sa lupa or dun sa dagat. Diba? Kung dun tayo nagde-drill. And then eventually, pag natapos na yung drilling natin, pag naubos na let's say yung oil dun sa kailangan na natin tanggalin, i-dismantle na natin. Okay? That's an expected liability. Okay? So, provision din siya. Nga lang, kunyari sabi may provision tayo for that plant dismantlement, it cannot be used to absorb environmental warranty payments. Kunyari, may provision ka for this, tapos nagkaroon ng damage sa environment. So, siningil ka ngayon ng DNR. So, ibang usapan yun eh. So, hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung estimated liability mo doon for yung sa ibang item na yun o ibang bagay na yun. Okay? Kung ganun yung case, edi gawa ka ng panibagong provision. Ibang usapan naman yung magpo-provide ka ng provision for that particular environmental damage. Okay? If an expenditure is charged against a provision that was originally recognized for another purpose, that would camouflage the impact of two different events. O diba, kunyari, meron ka palang environmental pollution, supposed to be that is a loss or expense on our part, sa business natin, sa entity natin. Dapat gawa ka na panibagong provision na para maipakita mo talaga na meron kang loss or expense for that. Hindi pwedeng, nagkaroon tayo ng pollution tapos yung expense natin, gagamitin natin itong sa plant dismantlement. Hindi pwede yung ganun. Okay? That's a fraud. So, yun lang naman yung sinasabi niya. Kung para saan talaga yung provision mo, dapat para dun talaga siya. Kung iba naman yung usapan na yan, gawa ka ng panibagong provision for that. No? Especially pag meron tayong panibagong liability. Okay na pa, future operating losses. Provision shall not be recognized for future operating loss. Hindi pwede tayong mag-estimate ng or magkakaroon tayo ng ng loss for the coming year. So, gawa tayo ng provision. Hindi pwede yung ganun. Okay? Provision for operating losses is not recognized because past events creating the present obligation has not occurred. Kasi yung operating loss, malalaman mo lang yan o mag-occur ka lang ng operating loss pag nakita mo na yung operation or yung performance ng business or ng company natin for that particular year. Di ka naman, hulaan mo kung next year o sa ilang years in the future na malulugi tayo. Hindi. Although kahit nasabihin natin na manghuhula ka talaga at nahulaan mo na yun, pero wala pang event eh. 'Di ba? Wala pang event na nangyari or sabihin natin, next year baka magkaroon ng gera, magkaka-loss tayo dyan. Wala pang gera eh, next year pa yun eh. So wala pa yung event na sinasabi natin. Okay? Yun nga lang, however, an expectation of future operating losses indication that certain assets may be impaired. Impairment na yung pinag-uusapan natin dito, hindi na siya yung provision. Okay? So again, sabi niya dito, no, future operating loss, hindi siya pwedeng mag-recognize ng provision for that. Hindi liability yon pag may future operating loss tayo. Okay? Ano pa? Onerous contract. Sa ano niya to? Sa loan obligations and contract. Pag sinabi natin onerous, ibig sabihin mayroong obligation. Okay? Meron tayong gagawin and we have to spend money or resources for that. Okay? If an entity has an onerous contract or normally contract na may kapalit, the present obligation under the contract shall be recognized and measured as a provision. Okay? An onerous contract is a contract in which the unavoidable cost of meeting the obligation under the contract exceed the economic benefits expected to be received under it. So, yun nga lang, burdensome. Yun kasi yung in law kasi parang ganun yung pag sinabing onerous, so, di ba? May burden. Okay, dito sa atin, sa accounting definition, sinabing onerous contract. Burdensome talaga kasi parang palugi na contract to eh. Pumasok ka sa contract, mas malaki pa yung cost niya or obligation or yung expenses mo dyan kaysa doon sa benefit na makukuha mo. Sabi ng PS 37 paragraph 68 mandates that the unavoidable cost under the contract represent the least net cost of exiting from the contract. Okay? So, ano ba yung pinakamaliit na possible na option natin na gagastusin para masettle natin yung contract na yan? Okay? Least net cost. Okay? Para maana natin. Lowest among kung may mga options ka dyan. The lower amount between the cost of fulfilling the contract and the compensation or penalty arising from failure to fulfill the contract is the least cost of exiting from the contract. So, kumbaga dito, if you have a choice whether isa-settle mo ba or magbabayad ka ng penalty, kung saan din yung mas maliit, syempre dun ka. Diba? A wise man would told you that kung saan yung mas maliit doon, edi doon ka. Kung mas maliit pa yung penalty kaysa doon sa cost of settling the obligation or yung mo dito of meeting the obligation edi doon ka na lang sa penalty, mas maliit naman pala Okay? So yan, the lower amount. So yung sinasabi niya dito, least net cost. Okay, meron tayong mga examples dito ng provision. Na-mention na nga natin kanina yung warranties. Okay, dun sa previous na chapter natin. The best estimate of warranty is the cost recognized provision because there's a clear constructive obligation arising from an obligating event. Kasi nagbenta ka So therefore, you are obliged to provide for the warranty. Ano pa? Ito, environmental contamination. Baka may sa ginagawa mo nagkaroon ng environmental damage. If an entity has an environmental policy that other parties would expect the entity to clean up any contamination, or if the entity has broken current environmental legislation, then a provision for environmental damage shall be made. Okay? So whether constructive yan or uh, legal yung obligation na yan, syempre it will have cost on your part. So kailangan mag-provide ka dyan. The obligating event is the contamination of the property which gives rise to constructive or legal obligation. Again, magbe-best estimate ka kung magkano kaya yung gagastusin nun sa pag-clean up ng environmental damage na yan. Okay? Decommissioning or abandonment cost. Ito yung na-mention natin kanina sa oil drilling. Okay, or oil mining. Kung bumili ka ng oil field, it is put under legal obligation to decommission the site at the end of its life. Siyempre, kailangan aalisin mo rin. Hindi naman pwedeng pagkatapos ng pag naubos na yung oil, iiwan mo lang na doon na butas yung, diba, yung lupa o yung dagat. So, kailangan i-decommission mo, tatanggalin mo rin siya. Gagastusan mo yan. May provision ka dyan kung magkano yung gagastusin mo doon. Okay? And maybe capitalized as cost of oil field. Medyo nasa ano pa siya eh. Sa ibang discussion to ng wasting asset or sa depletion na discussion siya. Kaso, ito, na ano natin, just like example, yung na-example natin kanina, yung court case. Talagang kasal talaga. Ganun talaga after a wedding in the current year. The example na to, people died possibly as a result of food poisoning. Siguro bitter siguro dito yung nagluluto, sabi na kasal-kasal kayo, hindi po kinakasal yan. Nilason niya. Yan, di ka proceeding sa statement. Para hindi naman joke lang yan. Pero siguro yung sa company, kunyari catering services, nag-provide sila ng pagkain, tapos medyo may mga hindi na pala maganda yung pagkain na ibigay nila. May iba mga spoiled na siguro. Yan ang mga food poisoning. Grabe namang lalagyan talaga ng lason. Siguro lang, kunyari mga panis or napanis ng konti or may something, no? When the entity prepares a financial statement, kailangan tingnan nila yon. Okay? Hingi sila ng advice from the lawyer kung kamusta yung kaso nila, kung sa tingin ba ng mga lawyers na yan, matatalo tayo sa kaso or hindi. No? So, kailangan mag-provide tayo ng provision. If, yun nga lang, di ba na-mention natin kanina, kung probable lang naman. Pero baka naman, tinanong mo yung lawyer, tapos nakita naman na hindi naman tayo mag-aano dyan kasi, kunyari pala, binigay mo na sa kanila yung pagkain, tapos, sila naman yung nag-delay ng wedding. Supposed to be ngayon yung wedding, ginawa nila kinabukasan. Hindi nila nirep yung pagkain at nag-damage. Nasira. Ganyan. So, mga ganyang case, so sabi ng lawyer, hindi tayo magbabayad dyan. Huwag mo na i-consider yung provision. Okay? Kasi dapat probable eh. Pero kung probable yan, estimate mo kung magkano. Provide ka ng liability. Okay? Ano pa? Guarantee. Kunyari, naging guarantor ka. The current year entity gives a guarantee of certain borrowings of another entity. During the financial condition of the borrower deteriorates at year end, the borrower files a petition for bankruptcy. Ito lang, no? Pag ganito kasi yung case, kung guarantee ka, probable, sabihin natin na probable na meron kang babayaran. As guarantor, syempre nag-guarantor ka eh. Although may mga rules tayo dyan, guys. Later, I think may yan eh, meron kang subject dyan na, talking about guarantee, no, sa regulatory framework for business transaction. Hindi naman, pag sinabi kasing guarantor ka, pag hindi nakabayad is, ikaw yung nagbabayad eh. Ano lang yan, ang sinasabi kasi nito, ginagaranti mo yung kanyang financial solvency. Okay? Pero kung yung may utang, nagtago, hindi yun kasama dun sa contract of guarantee. Okay? Pero pag nag-file talaga na bankrupt or insolvent talaga, yun, magiging liable yung guarantor. Okay? Katulad nito, the borrower files a petition for bankruptcy. Ayan, meron ka talagang magiging sabit dyan. Nag-guarantee ka eh. So, best estimate kung magkano ba yung babayaran mo. Okay? So, yan. So, kailangan mag-provide ka ng provision. Okay? So, yan, yung mga examples ng provision natin. Now, let's go with itong restructuring. No? Paano ba napasok itong restructuring dito sa ating usapan? Sabi ng PS 37, paragraph 10, defines restructuring as a program that is planned and controlled by management and materially changes either the scope of the business of an entity or the manner in which the business is to be conducted. Later, may ibang discussion tayo dyan, no? On restructuring. Pero nasa advanced financial accounting and reporting na yan eh. Okay? Yan. May mga gagawin yung management lang, no? To change the scope of the business or the manner the business is to be conducted. Events that may qualify as restructuring are as follows. Sale or termination of a line of business. Yung malaking line of business ito. Hindi lang siya isang excuse me, hindi lang siya isang part ng business but a line of business. Closure of business location in a region or relocation of a business activity from one location to another, or relocation of headquarters from one country to another. Ito mga malalaking movements naman ito. No? Talking about region na sinasabi niya to, hindi ito yung parang dito sa atin sa Philippines lang na local, no? International yung tinatawag niya dyan mga region. Okay? Or change in management structure, such as elimination of a layer of management or making all functional units autonomous. And also, ano pa ba yung magiging restructuring natin dito? Fundamental reorganization of an entity that has a material and significant impact on its operations. So, yan yung sinasabi niyang restructuring. Okay? So, tingnan natin on how it affects dun sa discussion natin ng provision. Recognition of the provision for restructuring is required because constructive obligation may arise from the decision to restructure. Okay? So, kailangan natin tingnan dito dun sa effect ng restructuring kung baka meron tayong isa-settle or meron tayong babayaran or meron tayong gagastusin. Okay? Kasi just like for example, kunyari, the closure of a business location or termination of a line of a business. Baka may mga employee ka dyan na kailangan mo i-terminate eh. Tapos kailangan mo, kunyari, bayaran mo ng termination pay. Okay? So, pag ganun, well, you have to consider that. Meron ka palang babayaran, meron kang gagastusin. So, kailangan mag-provide ka na ng liability para dyan. Okay? So, constructive obligation for the restructuring arises two conditions are present. So, una, the entity has detailed formal plan for the restructuring which includes the following. So, meron ka ng detailed formal plan. Okay? The business being structured, principal location affected, location, function, and approximate number of employees who will be compensated for terminating their employment, date when the plan will be implemented, the expenditures that will be undertaken. May detailed formal plan ka na. And then, number two, the entity has raised valid expectation in the middle of those affected that the entity will carry out the restructuring by starting to implement the plan and announcing the main feature of those affected by it. Okay, so meron ka ng announcement. Okay, meron ka ng ginawa, meron ka ng inumpisahan dun sa restructuring mo. Ibig sabihin, you have already created that expectation to some parties. Just like normally kasi yung mga empleyado mo dito yung isang party na kailangan mo bayaran. So, pag ganun yung case, kailangan mo daw mag-provide, no? Liability mo yan. So, may illustration dito, sabi niya, the board of directors of an entity and their meeting held at the current year decided na magka-close down international branch, shift to international operations, and consolidate them with its domestic operations. May plan na, no? Wind up. And formalized na, agreed by the board of directors in that meeting. Letters were sent to the customer, suppliers, workers thereafter. Meetings were called to discuss the features of the formal plan to wind up the international operations. Okay, so mga interested parties present daw sa meeting na to. Amount of provision. Yung restructuring provision natin should include only direct expenditures arising from the restructuring. Dapat yung mga cost related lang dun sa restructuring. Okay? Necessarily incurred for the restructuring and not associated with the ongoing business of the entity. Kasi for example, kanina dito, kung may relocation ka, hindi nakasama dun yung pagre-relocate mo. Okay? Hindi na yun. Part na ng ongoing business yun eh. Pero kung may mata-terminate ka, yun, kasama yun talaga sa, because part of the restructuring yun eh. Okay? So, yung sabi niya, directly related lang. Huwag mo na isama yung part ng continuing business mo. Okay? Ongoing entity. For example, dito salaries and benefits of employees to be incurred after operating cease that are associated with the closure of the operation shall be included in the amount of the restructuring provision. Okay, so yan. So kailangan included yung amount na yan. Yan na, just like yung example nga natin kanina, no? Yung mga salaries and benefits na or termination pay. So from paragraph 37, pay starts sa paragraph 81, specifically excludes the following. Okay? Cost of retraining or relocating continuing staff. O, pag may gagastos ka nga, kunyari, mag-hire ka ng mga bagong tao, ibang usapan na yun. No? Or i-relocate mo yung kung sino yung may iwan ng mga staff. It's not part of the provision that we're talking about. Marketing or advertising program to promote the new company image. Wow, may ganun para something, magpapakita ka na naman, papakitang gilas ka na naman. Yan, kasi you already have a new company image. Parang ganun. Hindi nakasama yun, no? Continuing business na yun eh. An investment in new system or distribution network. So, part na ng continuing business na yan. Specifically, sabi yan ng PS 37, paragraph 81. Categorically disallowed. Specific yan kasi part ng future conduct of the business yan. Therefore, not liabilities relating to the restructuring program. Okay? So, yan. In-specify niya lang. Baka may mga cost na huwag mo nang isama dun sa amount ng restructuring provisions. Especially kung part yan ng ongoing business activities. Okay? Next, what about this contingent liability? Okay? Ano pa pag sinabi natin contingent liability? PS 37 paragraph 10 defines contingent liability in two ways. Okay? Ano daw? Contingent liability is a possible obligation. You see, the word possible, ang sabi kasi natin, dapat sa liability, probable na may outflow of economic resources embodying economic benefits. Probable. Ito possible lang. So, it means nasa 50-50 level lang siya. Or sabihin natin na less likely. From 50 to less likely na mangyayari siya. Okay? Although may past event din naman siya, existence will only be confirmed by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. Possible lang siya at the same time conditional pa. Okay? Sabi natin dito conditional. Depende. Okay? Depende. It will only be confirmed by pag may nangyari na something in the future. Okay? Yan yung sinasabi niya dito. Isang definition ng contingent liability. Kaya naging possible siya. Kasi depende pa nga eh. 50-50, it may not. Okay? So ano pa? A contingent liability is a present obligation that arises from past event but is not recognized. Bakit? It's not probable na may outflow of economic resources. Na-mention na natin to kanina. Kaya nga possible lang siya, no? Conditional. Ito hindi siya probable. Sige, nasa 50-50. And the amount, or ito pa isa pa. The amount of the obligation cannot be measured reliably. In this case, kasi meron tayong measurement principles eh. Diba? Paano natin ma-measure yung ano? Pero nandun na siya sa discussion that we had dun sa FAR natin, Financial Accounting and Reporting. May mga few chapters doon discussing conceptual framework. At meron tayong recognition principle. Kailan ba natin i-recognize ang isang liability? Probable and measurable. Number one, probable na may outflow of resources and bad economic benefit. Okay? Tapos pangalawa, the amount can be measured reliably. Dapat dalawa present yon. Probable na may outflow can be measured reliably. Dito, either lang siya. Okay? Present obligation naman ang problema. Yun nga lang, either pwedeng probable but not measured reliably, or sabihin natin that it's not probable or possible lang siya even though it can be measured reliably. Either of the two, yun yung sinasabi natin contingent liability. Again, sabi natin, for liability to be recognized, dapat probable and measurable. Yung contingent na to, either probable lang siya or measurable lang siya, but not both. Yan yung sinasabi na tong second definition ng liability, contingent liability natin. Okay? Now, what's the difference? Okay? Provision is recognized. Diba? Just like yung mga pinag-uusapan natin kanina. The provision is recognized. Ibig sabihin, ito pala, nandito pala siya sa treatment. Anyway, diniscuss ko na siya, no? Yung provision kasi is both probable and measurable. Okay? Yun yung main distinction nila eh. Provision is both probable and measurable. While contingent liability either lang, isa lang yan. Probable, measurable, but not both. Yan yung sinasabi natin sa inyo kanina. So, ano mangyayari? Again, yung provision is recognized as a liability. Ibig sabihin, gagawa natin ng journal entry, ipe-present natin yan dun sa financial statements. On the face of the financial statements as a liability per se. Okay? Yun yung provision. May recognition ka dito ng expense and liability. Pero, yan, paano yung contingent liability? A contingent liability is not recognized, pero i-disclose lang siya. Disclosure lang. Saan natin i-disclose? Sa notes to financial statements. Okay? Sa notes lang siya. Ano yung kailangan natin i-disclose dito? Description of the nature of the contingent liability, estimate ng kanyang magiging financial effect, indication of the uncertainty that exists, and possibility of any reimbursement, if any. Okay? Contingent liability is only disclosed. But if a contingent liability is remote, parang malayong mangyari, or napakaliit ng tsansa, less than 10%, no? Yung chance na mangyayari ito, hindi mo na kailangan disclose. Okay? Hindi naman niya maka-affect dun sa users decision making. Kasi nga, remote. Okay, yan yung treatment niya. Again, pag contingent liability, disclosure lang. Pero pag remote naman siya, wag mo nang pakialaman, hayaan mo na lang siya. Baon mo na lang siya sa limot. Para na-discuss na lang siya. Although liabilities, dapat yung natin dito. Yung point ng natin. Pero, na-mention niya lang para makita lang natin yung difference in the treatment of the contingent assets and contingent liability. Sabi naman ng PS 37 paragraph 10. Actually, ganun din naman yung yung contingent asset. Possible asset din siya. Tapos, rin siya? Conditional din. Okay, conditional din. Occurrence or non-occurrence of something that is beyond our control. Yung sinasabi ng contingent asset. And contingent asset shall not be recognized because it may result to a recognition of income that may never be realized. Meron tayong, sabi nga natin, diba, prudence or conservatism. Ganyan. Pag asset, hindi natin i-recognize yan contingent. However, if this, yung sinasabi natin, virtually certain, just like yung na-mention natin kanina about sa reimbursement, diba? Although, yung sa reimbursement na yon, 'di ba sabi natin i-asset natin kung sakaling meron. Pag virtually certain na. Pag sabi natin, masasabi talaga natin na talagang marireceive natin siya. Not really 100% certain, but malaki yung chance, no? Yan. hindi na siya contingent. Therefore, i-recognize na natin siya. Again, if it is virtually certain. Pag virtually certain, hindi na siya possible eh. Probable or yung probability niya masyadong malaki na. No? Yan. So, contingent asset is only disclosed when probable. Yeah, kaya sinabi ko dito kanina guys, no, masyadong malaki na siya to be probable. Okay? Pag probable lang siya, basically, di-disclose lang natin. Pero pag virtually certain, like, sabihin natin na malaking talagang makukuha natin yan. Yan, malapit na siya sa 100%. Yan, pwede natin i-recognize. Pero pag probable lang, disclose lang yan. Yan yung difference sa treatment dito, di ba napansin mo? Ang contingent liability, pag probable, provide. Okay? Ang contingent asset, pag probable, disclose. Ang contingent liability, pag possible, disclose. Ang contingent asset, pag possible and remote, no disclosure. Ibig sabihin, guys, kasi nga conservative tayo eh. Mas okay sa atin na mag-recognize ng liability. Mas okay na yon ma-recognize natin yung expense and liability kaysa mag-recognize tayo ng asset saka income. Kaya medyo may unfair or difference lang when it comes to their treatments. Okay? So, yan yung difference niya. Yeah. Okay. So, now let's go with this. Meron lang dagdag na discussion. Hopefully, you still understand what I'm saying. Medyo umulang kasi. On decommissioning liability. Which is nga yung naano natin. I think naano rin natin to kanina in a way. Excuse me. Na-discuss din natin siya in a way. So, decommissioning liability is an obligation to dismantle, remove, and restore an item of property, plant, and equipment as required by law or contract. Okay? Ayan. Dismantle, remove, and restore an item of PPE as required by law or contract. It is also called asset retirement obligation. Pero normally kasi ito, no? This accounting supposed to be is medyo related siya dun sa ating discussion of depletion or nandun siya sa wasting asset company na discussion sa financial accounting din. Yun nga lang, since we're talking here of liabilities, medyo naipasok sa usapan itong decommissioning liability, especially when talking about provisions. Okay? So, meron tayong illustration dito. An entity extracts oils, okay, gas and oil from in the Philippine Deep. January 1, 2020, the entity constructed a greening platform, 25 million. And sabi ng Philippine law, after 10 years, i-dismantle natin. Okay? Straight line method yung pag-depreciate ng drilling platform. And the entity has estimated that such decommissioning cost will be 5 million. So, ibig sabihin, after 10 years ng pagdidrill natin, i-dismantle natin. Siyempre, tatanggalin din natin ito. And at the same time, gagastusan natin yun ng 5 million. May discount rate, meron tayong present value factor. Kasi ito yung sinasabi natin guys, no? Since after 10 years pa to, matagalan pa eh. So, possibly, or not possibly, yung talagang, yung effect ng discounting niya is malaki. Kasi matagal siya eh, no? At ang sabi natin kanina, yung liability natin dito, if the effect of time value of money is material, kailangan natin i-discount ito. And kailangan natin i-measure ito. Specifically, this 5 million will be, ano siya, it will be, uh, it will be recognized at its present value. Okay, kaya nga nung kinompute niya dito, 5 million times 0.322, yung amount ng ano natin is 1610. Tapos ito guys, i-amortize natin to every year. Okay, magko-compute tayo ng 10 at 12% parang interest niya. And then, sabi nga natin kanina, di ba? Yung amortization niya will increase this amount, yung amount ng liability natin. Hanggang after 10 years, yung magiging carrying amount nito, ng liability na to, will go back to its face na 5 million na until we settle. Okay? Yun yung mangyayari dyan. So, ang entry natin, ito, no, yung drilling platform, yung sabi natin kasi kanina, this amount could be capitalized. Okay? As part ng ating asset. Okay? So, kaya nga dito, sa drilling platform na dinebit niya, ang entry niya is 26,610 debit. Yung 25 na cost nung ano talaga, PPE plus yung liability natin na 1,610,000. Okay? Now, next yung depreciation, this is nasa ano kasi to eh. No, sa intermediate accounting 1 sana na ano to. Anyway, straight line basis lang naman tayo. Walang salvage value. So, divided by 10 lang yan. Straight line. Ganun kasimple yun. So, 26 million. Ito yung kanina. So, for the 10 years, i-depreciate mo siya. 26,610,000 divided by 10. So, every year, from year 1 to year 10, i-depreciate mo 2,661. Okay? Tapos, yung sabi natin, ito na yung amortization. Itong 31 na to, ito yung amortization. So, ang entry natin sa amortization is debit interest expense less, credit, sabi natin itong, it will increase to the carrying amount of the liability. So, ito muna ang initial niya, 1610 times 12%. So, magkano yun? 193,200. Take note, no? Credit mo ito. Ibig sabihin, dadagdag siya sa carrying amount ito. And then, yung carrying amount na yun, magkano ba yun? Let's say, saan yung calculator natin? 1610 plus itong inamortize natin, 'di ba? Credit natin siya sa dito sa ano natin sa liability natin plus itong 193,200 at the end of 2020 yan. At the end of 2020, yung carrying amount nitong decommissioning liability natin is 1,803,200. Which is, later, ganun pa rin naman siya, this will become the basis of our interest. Times 0.12, debit interest expense, credit decommissioning liability, ito na siya, 216,384. So, ang mangyayari niyan, for the next 10 years, ganyan, meron kang ganitong entry. Anong entry dyan again? This is amortization. Okay? And this amortization, dadagdag yan sa carrying amount. So, dadagdag na naman siya dito sa carrying amount ng atin kanina, yung 2,160,300, magkano? 2,160,840. Tapos, yun na naman, magko-compute ka na naman ng 12% interest based on that. Padagdag ng padagdag ng padagdag yan. Hanggang by the end of 10 years, babalik na to. Itong nakikita nyo, di ba, ni-record natin dito is 1,610,000. By the end of the 10 years na nag-amortize ka na nag-amortize, magiging 5 million yan. Para, pag sinettle mo na siya, ito na. Pag sinettle mo na yung liability, babayaran mo na yung 5 million. So, ito na siya, di ba? Nakita nyo, yung decommissioning liability natin, by the end of 10 years, magiging 5 million na siya. Ang nangyari, the cost is 5.5. Okay lang. So, magiging loss na lang siya. Okay? So, yung 5.5 yung babayaran mo, pero 5 million lang yung na-recognize mong liability before, magiging loss lang yung 5 million. Okay? So, yun yung nangyari. Kaya, in-explain niya dito, guys, no? January 1, 2020. Yan. The commissioning liability is 16,110. Nga lang, yung 12% amortization mo ng interest for the 10 years, it will bring this carrying amount to 5 million. Kaya pag nagbayad ka na magiging ano na siya, 5 million. Tapos separate naman yung when it comes to the asset side. Ito yung sinasabi natin. Yung asset natin na to, since mawawalan siya, tatanggalin na natin, i-recognize na natin, i-zero out na lang natin. This is on the asset kasi na accounting sana to eh. The recognition of the asset, alisin na natin yung depreciation, alisin na natin yung cost ng drilling platform. So wala na, 0-0 na sila. Okay? So yun lang naman yung ano dito sa decommissioning liability. What if may changes? Sabi ng if RIC 1, okay, changes in the measurement of the existing decommissioning liability shall be accounted for as follows. A decrease in the liabilities deducted from the cost of the asset. Bakit bawas sa asset? Kasi di ba na-remember nyo, dito kanina, saan na yung entry? Itong liability na to, dinagdag natin dito sa cost of the asset So kung babawasan mo rin to, dapat bawasan mo rin yung asset. Kasi ano mo siya, in-include mo siya dun If the decrease in the liability exceeds the carrying amount of let's say kasi dine-depreciate na natin siya So ibig sabihin, itong drilling platform na to, year by year, nababawasan yung carrying amount niya because of this depreciation. Sabi niya, what if nag-exceed na? Yung decrease in the liability exceeded the carrying amount na. The excess is recognized in profit or loss. In that case, medyo magiging profit na yan. Okay? Medyo parang other income siya on our part. Kasi, ibig sabihin na overstate yung liability mo before So, ngayon, nakita mong lumit yung liability mo beyond dun sa carrying amount niya. So, medyo may effect yun dito sa profit or loss natin. Okay? Tignan natin later. If there's an increase in the liability, added din siya on the cost of the asset. Ganun din siya. Okay? Kasi nga, yung ating decommissioning liability kanina, sabi natin, naging part siya nung cost nung asset natin. However, the entity shall consider whether this is an indication that the carrying amount of the asset may not be fully recoverable. So, kailangan nating tingnan yan pag merong increase in the liability. Kapag meron, impairment na siya. Okay, medyo sa ibang discussion kasi ito sa PPE when it comes to the impairment. Okay, pag hindi fully recoverable, yung carrying amount of the asset, then i-impair na lang natin. So, kailangan natin gawin yun. If lang naman If there is indication. So, for example, dito, meron siyang illustration on January 1, 2020. Sea Oil Company is 10 years old. The cost of the plant is 12 million with accumulated depreciation of 4. Ibig sabihin dito, 12 minus 4, ang carrying amount ng ating plant is 8 million. The plant is 30 years and was depreciated using straight line with no residual value. Because of the unwinding discount 6% over the 10 years, yung decommissioning liability natin from 1 million, ito yung initial na dinagdag natin dun sa cost of the plant, naging 1,790 na. Ito yung effect nung natin because of the amortization. Diba sabi natin padagdag dun sa carrying amount no decommissioning liability. However, on January 1, okay, the discount does not change pero nag-estimate ka that the result of technological advances, the net present value of the decommissioning liability has decreased. Ibig sabihin, sabi niya because of the technological advances, mas mapapamura tayo. Hindi na tayo kailangan gumastos ng malaki. So, dapat yung decommissioning liability, 800,000 na lang. Mababawasan siya. Sorry, it's not magiging 800 but it will be decreased by 800,000. Okay? So, itong decrease na to, sabi natin dito, pag may decrease, deducted from the cost of the asset. So, 1,790, babawasan natin yan. Debit, decommissioning liability, 800. Tapos, yung plant asset natin, yan, babawas siya dun sa cost of the asset. Yun nga lang, ito lang yung pag-compute niya kasi ng depreciation, dun sa PPE sana, Intermediate Accounting 1, may separate na discussion dito when it comes to kasi it's more like a change in accounting estimate yung magiging treatment natin dito. So, parang kinumputan niya na lang ng bagong carrying amount kasi nga, di ba dito, ang carrying amount natin is 8 million. Ito, 12 minus 4. Binawasan pa natin ng 8. So, magiging 7.2 na lang. Ang mangyayari kasi sa accounting, itong 7.2, i-depreciate na lang natin siya for the remaining life. 10 years na yan eh. So, kung 30 years yung life ng asset minus 10, so 20 years na lang. So, what will happen is, this 7.2 will be divided into 20 years. Okay? So, magiging 360 na lang yung depreciation natin. Yan, yung annual depreciation. Sa ano to eh, change in accounting estimate, specifically do sa depreciation na discussion sana. Tapos, syempre, pag nag-compute ka rin ng decommissioning liability, magkano na lang kasi yung liability natin dito? 1,790. Ito, 1,790, diba? 1,790. Binawasan natin siya ng 800. So, 990 na lang. So, eventually, ito na lang yung magiging basis ng amortization natin. Times 6% ngayon yan. 990 times 6%. Ito yung i-amortize natin. Interest expense, credit, decommissioning liability, 59,400. So, yun na yung magiging pattern mo. Okay? Yun na yung magiging pattern mo. You will be starting na with this 990, tapos ito na yung gagamitin mo, annual depreciation. Okay? Pag may change. Okay? So, parang change in accounting estimate lang yung mangyayari. Ano lang yung effect niya? Pag may decrease in the liability, bawas din siya sa asset. Bawas sa asset, eventually affecting depreciation niya. And then, syempre, bumawas sa liability, in effect, may change din siya doon sa amount ng amortization mo. Pag may increase, ganun din, dagdag din siya doon sa cost of the asset. Yun nga lang, you have to consider baka may impairment. Okay? Pag may impairment, that's a different situation na siya. Ibang scenario na. Okay? So, yun lang muna para sa discussion natin ng chapter 4. And bye!